Greetings, it's Adam with IratA, as well as ArcadeHeroes.com. I was tempted to put this under Arcade Heroes, but decided I'll do IratA. I haven't done much in the way of videos on this channel in the past week or so, just because I've been busy with taxes. That's always fun. But anyways, we've got some news from Atari, where the new and current CEO of the company, Wade Rosen, is continuing to make some great moves that I think is helping turn the brand around, or at least the perception of the brand, where just they've been riding a lot on nostalgia, and of course this is still riding on nostalgia, but it still seems to be a pretty positive move. And so I got in my email a press release that says, Atari announces acquisition of 12 classic arcade properties, including Berzerk and Frenzy. Now, if you're not familiar with Berzerk, I've got it up on the screen here, just playing it on my Atari XEGS. And from the port that came along there, of course, some may have originally learned about Berzerk from the ports on the Atari 2600 and the 5200. I was one of those, as I, unfortunately, even though I'm a big arcade guy, as a kid, I rarely had a chance to visit an arcade, and so I didn't even know that Berzerk was an arcade game first, and I thought it was an Atari 2600 game. And of course, Atari had licensed the arcade game for the home ports, and thanks to their great artists, they produced some great marketing materials that use like this cover poster here, which I remember looking at that as a kid and that igniting my imagination, and that was always fun to look at. But one oddity about this press release is it says in the subheader, a dozen retro titles join Atari's expansive library of new and old favorites. But if you read the whole press release, it does not mention what the other 10 games are. Now, if you're not familiar with Frenzy, that's a sequel to Berzerk. But, and obviously, what must have come out of this deal, Berzerk is the most recognizable out of all the IP. My best guess is that they purchased Stern Electronics' game catalog, which personally I've been curious who was owning that, if it was Stern Pinball or if it was somebody else. I don't know for sure where a lot of rights land on classic games. But now Atari gets to expand their portfolio at least by 12 other titles. And I mean, Berzerk certainly is a great one. It mentions in the press release that Atari will seek to expand digital and physical distribution of the classic titles, create new games based on the IP, and explore brand and merchandising collaborations. And also has a quote from Wade Rosen where he mentions that so many people first encounter playing Berzerk on an Atari console. And again, I'm one of those. So where can it go from here? I imagine they might be looking at doing a Berzerk Recharged at some point, or Berzerk and Frenzy Recharged, or something like that. I mean, there's still plenty of space where you could do an entirely new game based on Berzerk, not just a recharged sort of thing, but like a 3D sort of thing. Like trying to think of some late '90s arcade games that kind of fit the same mold. I think it's Zombie Adventure by Sega. I might be misquoting the title on that one, but or Chaos Filled by Taito, and so there's some interesting ways that they could take this, just depending. But one other interesting aspect of this whole story is Atari's IP catalog. Now, not a lot of people know this, but Atari doesn't have a very big catalog anymore. In recent years, other CEOs had sold off a lot of things. Like one game that's no longer under the Atari flag is Battlezone. They sold that to Rebellion back in 2012, and there's a bunch of other games that they had sold. And then there's also the misperception about what Atari owned in the first place. Back in 1984, when Warner sold the Atari home side to Jack Tramiel, anything that Warner Atari, which would have been the arcade division, also known as Atari Games, had created. So like Paperboy, Marble Madness, Tubin, Area 51, San Francisco Rush, etc. None of that belonged to the home Atari side, the home division, and anything under Jack Tramiel, and then later Infogrames, which is the current Atari. And so they don't have any rights to any of the Atari arcade games that came out after 1984. Now they have stuff from Pong up till iRobot, Major Havoc, and of course Centipede and Asteroids, and those sorts of things that a lot of people associate with Atari, but again, not a lot of other games. And under the Tramiels, they generally outsourced the work and did not produce things in-house, and so the rights did not stay with them. And so like if you pull up the Atari 50th anniversary collection, I mean myself and some others have pointed out that unfortunately it's lacking on certain systems like the Atari 5200, the Lynx, the Jaguar. There's just not really a lot of titles there, and that's because they would have to be licensed from other third parties that owned those rights, and Atari didn't have them. It's particularly disappointing, I think, with the Lynx. Just so many titles in that library don't belong to Atari. I'll do another video about that at some point. But yeah, this is an interesting, good way to expand on that. It'd be great if they were able to update the Atari 50th anniversary collection with more of these games. And yeah, what do you think about this? What do you hope to see come out of Berzerk or Frenzy or whatever these other titles are? Now, one thing to note is I did send an email to the PR firm that has their contact info at the end of the press release to ask, what are the other 10 games? It is kind of weird that they wouldn't list those, but if I get a response, I'll do a follow-up video on that. But overall, good news. I'm looking forward to seeing what can happen with these, and hopefully it'll be nothing but good stuff. We'll see you around. See you on the next video.